where both myself and the other person is talking over each other. So none of us are listening. We're communicating, but it's just not being received. Hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome to MindPod. Today is going to be a little bit different because it's going to be just me and you. We're going to look into what is communication. Now, we communicate on a daily basis, but sometimes communication can become very, very important. So let's see what we can stir up. So, what is communication? Communication is means of sending and receiving information. The purpose of it is to understand each other. Now, there are different ways of communicating that could be effective or ineffective. Now, we all prefer effective communication and of course not the ineffective communication, but it happens. So why does that happen? I think there's quite a few reasons why ineffective communication can happen. So when you look at the purpose of communication is to understand each other. What is the other person saying to you? And how can you make the other person understand where you're coming from? How do you do that? I think it's very important to understand who you are talking to. For example, if you're speaking to a 5-year-old, I'm sure you're gonna use the vocabularies that a child will understand. So you're gonna simplify the conversation. You're gonna use easy words so that they can understand what you're trying to explain. But when we're speaking to adults, we expect them to understand what you're saying because we all think that the vocabularies that we use are the same, but it's not. We all have different definition of certain words or expressions, such as loyalty. Now, if you ask what is loyalty to different people, you're probably going to get different definitions of loyalty. And when you don't explain your own definition of the word that you're using, that's when miscommunication can happen. So that's very interesting, isn't it? Using the same word and the other person understands it completely differently just because they have a different definition of the same word. So how can you prevent that? What I usually do is making sure that the words that I use or the words that I communicate with is something that they understand. And if I feel like the word can be defined differently from the other person, then I make sure to explain what that word means to me and how they understand that. There's another big factor that also plays a role in understanding what the other person is saying, which is wanting to be understood. So it's one thing to understand someone saying something, and then it's another thing to want someone to understand what you're saying. When you get caught up in wanting to be understood, you're most likely going to stop listening to what the other person is saying. And I've seen this many times, and it has happened to me as well, where both myself and the other person is talking over each other. So none of us are listening. We're communicating, but it's just not being received. So taking turns listening to each other is very effective. I've tried this myself, where I would ask for 5 minutes, or I would ask them to not interrupt me until I'm done saying everything that I want to say. And then they take the turn after me. In that way, we're not talking over each other. When you do that, 2 people are taking turns to be listened. Now, this is very important because when you stop listening and when the other person stops listening and you start feeling, or the other person starts feeling like they're not being understood, emotions starts coming out. Emotions such as frustration, anger, disappointment, feeling hurt, upset, all those emotions. And those emotions can start clouding over what it is that you wanted to communicate to begin with. And then it becomes a fight, it becomes an argument, it becomes someone walking away, it becomes something unpleasant. We all want to be understood. I think most of us try so hard to be understood and forget to understand the other person. And when we're all trying to be understood, no one's being heard. And that's the problem. When no one's being heard, nothing is understood. And when nothing is understood, none of us can get the result that we want. So as you can see, when miscommunication happens or when ineffective communication happens, it can go to an ugly path. So how can we effectively communicate with each other? I'd like to highlight again that we're talking about important communication. Something that matters to you, something that matters to the person that you care about, or the matter that you care about. So what can come in to help is willingness. Do you have the willingness to understand the person? Do you have the willingness to work things out? Do you have the willingness to listen? And do you have the willingness to find a solution? So willingness is really important. The second thing that could help is being patient. Be patient when the other person is telling you something. You might not agree with them. You might not have the same viewpoint. But if you care enough about the person or the matter, patience will take you a long way. Third thing, pay attention. Pay attention to the words they use. Pay attention to who you are talking to. Pay attention to what is it that they're trying to say. The fourth one is timing. When do you pick the time to talk about something very important? Give them a heads up. Hey, there's something that I really need to talk to you about, and this is very important for me. Do you have the time? Or can we make the time? And then set intentions. Why is it that you're talking to them about this? And what is it that you're hoping to get out of this conversation? I think it's really important to make sure the other person understands your intention, that you're not here to fight, you're not here to judge, you're not here to criticize. You're just there to be understood, where you're coming from. And there is no winner or loser when you're communicating. This should be a win and win situation. So as you can see, communication can be done effectively if you can use all these tools. And if you take your time and start practicing, the first time you might not be the best, the second time or the third. But as we all know, we learn from experience. We all become better with practice. In the beginning, it might be a little challenging just because it's something that you haven't done or something that you're not used to. But start using patience. But these are all skills. These are skills that you only attain if you put yourself out there and use them until that becomes a habit. And then once it's a habit, you don't even have to think. It's just, you're on autopilot, And once you're on autopilot, you're going to become the great communicator, where you're able to understand someone and that someone can understand you. Another important thing to think about when you're explaining a complex thought or an emotion is how can you simplify it as much as you can. You can only do that if you sit with a thought or an emotion and explain it to yourself. Human beings are very complex. So before you can explain what's going on inside of you, you'll need to sit with that thought or emotions that you're going through and see how can you simplify it for yourself. It will help you be able to explain it a lot easier to other people. So what's your thought on communication? What's your communication style? What's working and what's not working? Let me know if there are any topics that you'd like me to cover. I'm very open to sharing my thoughts, my own experience. And if you have any questions, please do ask. I'm happy to answer those as well. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Sara, and until next time.